Hey, how's it going? So today I want to talk about something that you should focus on if you want to optimize your sales process. If you're watching this live, if you happen to be catching me live, do me a favor, hit pound live. Let me know where you are tuning in from. And if you happen to be catching this via the replay, do me a favor and hit pound replay and let me know where you are tuning in from. A sales process is simply just a series of steps. And once you get those series of steps right, then ultimately you're going to be able to have an optimized sales process. When I review my sales process, when I review sales process for people that I'm working with, there's usually certain components. And if one of those components are not properly optimized, it really just derails and breaks the entire sales process. So then, those are the things that you should be focusing on as opposed to the entire sales process. I want to kind of just go back to, I don't know, maybe about 20 years ago when I had my first sales job. My first sales job, I was my first year into college, and my goal is it's a sales job. So I went into that job every single day with an objective, and that objective was I need to make a sale. 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 But unfortunately, I didn't last long in that job. I wasn't successful in that role, so I was eventually terminated. And then I want to say maybe about 4 or 5 years later, I got another job. It was a job where I needed to be able to convince people to take the next step at each stage in the process. And in that role itself as well, I didn't do too well. And luckily, by that time, I had gained some additional skills, I had gained some additional knowledge. And because of that, I was able to remain with that organization, and I was able to use my skill set within a separate department. Use my skill set within a separate department. I started growing with that company. But as I started to grow with that company, there were some things that I really paid attention to. And the thing that I paid attention to is I paid attention to the individuals who were in the sales department. I paid attention to the ones that were successful, and I paid attention to the ones that were not successful. And eventually, I started to just have a conversation with one of the managers who was running that department to really try to understand, okay, what makes someone in that department successful? I was very transparent with this person. I say, hey, at one point prior to you arriving to this organization, I worked in this department. I wasn't as successful. You've been running these type of organizations and these type of departments for a very long time. What makes someone successful? And essentially what that person, told me is that person told me, essentially what makes someone successful is to just focus on one thing at a time. So I'm going to use an example. For example, one of the things that the individual, the representatives had to do is they had to make outbound calls. So they come in, they make these outbound calls, and when they make these outbound calls, the one thing that she wanted those individuals to focus on is just to get someone on the phone. That is it. Don't worry about getting the sale today. Don't worry about anything else. Just worry about getting someone on the phone. And when you get that person on the phone, right, the next thing that you simply need to worry about is you just simply need to worry about, asking that person to come in to have an in-person interview. So from a metric standpoint on a daily basis, the only thing that she told her advisors to focus on is, hey, just focus on getting 3 people on the phone. And when you get these 3 people on the phone, 3 to 5 people on the phone, when you get these 3 to 5 people on the phone, just focus on getting one of those individuals to come in and see you and to have an in-person interview with you. And what this person told me is that when she had her team members focus on those things, everything else fell into play, right? Everything else fell into play. Everything else was properly optimized. Well, I find that in this online environment, right? So from an online standpoint, a lot of us have sales processes that are online. I have a sales process that is online. My sales process starts off with someone being aware, knowing exactly who I am, and then that person goes to what I call a lead generation and or lead capture page, and then that person schedules a time on my calendar, and then some of those individuals become clients. And if I think about that process, and I think about within that process, what do I have control over? There's only a small number of things I have control over. I can create a piece of content, and when I create that piece of content, the only thing that I need to worry about is I can't go out and say, I want this piece of content to get me a client, because I can't control if someone becomes a client as a result of seeing that piece of content. The only thing that I can focus on, the only thing that I can control is from an awareness standpoint, right? I'm going to create a piece of content, and that piece of content is going to be an awareness piece of content, and it's going to allow people to learn and or know more about me. That's it. That's all that piece of content is going to do. Once that piece of content does its job, towards the end of that piece of content, usually there is a call to action that's going to invite that person to the next step. So let's just say that I'm inviting that person to go to a page, and that page is designed to invite that person to provide me with their contact information. Well, that is the next component of my sales process. And when someone arrives to that page, the only goal for that page is for that page to collect an email address for me, right? And after that person provides me with an email address, I deliver on the asset. And after I deliver on the asset, thunder is very loud right now for whatever reason. After I deliver on that asset, now I am inviting that person to the next step of my sales process. So here's what I'm going to encourage you to do. I'm going to encourage you to basically just write out what your sales process is. What are the series of steps that someone should go through in order to become a client? And based on those series of steps, what is it that you have absolute 100% control over? Right? The things that you have 100% control over, are they properly optimized? So do you have an ability, or do you have a way to create content that's awareness content? I know right now, depending on how you're consuming this piece of content, this is video content. That is not the only way for you to create awareness type of content. You can have written content, and the written content could be awareness type of content. That is something that you have absolute control over, because you can create content. And the other thing that you somewhat have control over is distribution. So from a distribution standpoint, right now, I'm publishing this piece of content inside of my group. Facebook is going to, in some ways or another, because this is organic traffic, is going to control how many people see this piece of content. Well, from a distribution standpoint, I can take this piece of content and I can pay Facebook, and I can say to Facebook, hey, Facebook, I want you to show this to 2,000 people. And from a control standpoint, I now have control over how many more people see that piece of content, right? So that's my awareness piece of content. And let's just say I created my awareness piece of content, whether it be written content and or video content. And at the end of the piece of content, I invite people to go and download a free resource and or free lead magnet, etc. Well, at the end of the day, to be honest with you, I don't have control over if people go and download the free lead magnet or not, because that is something that they have to decide to do on their own. What I can continue to do, though, is from a distribution standpoint and from an awareness standpoint, I can continue to show as many people that piece of content as possible. I can decide to show that piece of content to a different type of an audience, and so on and so forth. So the things that I have control over, those are the only things that you want to make sure that you are optimizing at each step of the way. Now, unfortunately, some people just don't do some of those things, right? Not because they just don't want to do them, because they may not necessarily know that they need to do these things at every step of the process, right? So you want to make sure that you do those things, awareness content, some type of a call to action, and then that call to action sends them to the next step of your sales process. The next step of the sales process that I happen to be talking about right now happens to be a landing page that someone goes to, and that landing page is going to simply compel them to provide me with their contact information, so that way I can deliver additional content to them and I can invite them to the next step of my sales process. That's my sales process. It's an example of a sales process, for example, right? So you want to just outline what is your sales process, and you just want to simply make sure that from an optimization standpoint, that every step of of that process is optimized. And you want to just be able to ask yourself, okay, what do I have what do I have control over? Where are the bottlenecks? Where the bottlenecks currently exist? Where does the bottlenecks currently exist? And am I going through and am I going to optimize every single step of of the process? That's the thing that was just on my mind today. I was thinking about, sales processes. I was having conversations with someone not so long ago about a sales process, and we were looking at that person's sales process, and it was just, just basically just the components. We were looking at the different components. Component number one, does component number one even exist in the first place, right? There were some times throughout my journey where I didn't even have certain components in place. So whereby I thought I had a sales process, I didn't have a sales process because I didn't have any components. I didn't have some of those components, in place. So thing number one is you want to make sure that you have those components, in place. Thing number two is once you have those components in place, you want to make sure that you optimize those components, because once each of those components are properly optimized, that makes up your entire sales process, and that is where you can go ahead and generate, the leads if that's part of your sales process, and that is where you can go ahead and generate, generate the sales, right? So from an awareness standpoint, if I publish a piece of video and I pay Facebook 50 cents, and based on me paying Facebook 50 cents, Facebook shows that video to just 50 people, well, right then and there, my issue is distribution. My issue is from an awareness standpoint, there just isn't enough people that is aware of me to be able to, for me to be able to have an optimized sales process. So right then and there, if I go and say, hey, coach, I'm not getting any sale, what the coach is going to say, well, you need to beef up your front end. You need to beef up your awareness. You need to make sure that more people become aware of you, because if more people become aware of you, then now you're giving your marketing funnel, you're giving your sales process a higher chance of success, per se. And based on that higher chance of success, you can get better results. And let's just say I've optimized my my awareness phase. Now I'm sending people to my lead generation phase. Well, if I'm sending 100 people a day to my lead generation phase, and after about a week, no one's become a lead, well, now from an optimum, now the issue is if you sent 500 people to a lead generation page and no one's become a lead, the issue at that point, right? One of the issues at that point could just be you don't have an optimized lead generation page, meaning that you could be sending someone to a website and their website doesn't necessarily address a problem. The website is not properly optimized. People aren't compelled to take the next step with you, so on and so forth. So look at them in different components. Look at each individual component, optimize each individual component, and when you optimize and just focus on whatever it is that you can control, right? Going back to my analogy and my example earlier, the only thing that that manager, was telling their team member is, I just want you to, your only goal is I don't want you to worry about making a sale. I just want you to make calls, and your only goal is to have conversations with people. Have conversations with 3 to 5 people, and when you have a conversation with 3 to 5 people, invite those individuals to come into the office to have an in-person interview. And once they do that, everything else will fall into play, right? So look at your business from that perspective. Look at the individual buckets, look at the individual components, and make sure that each of those components are properly optimized. That's it. That's all I have for you today. Pound live if you happen to be catching this live, and or pound replay if you're catching the replay. That's it for now. I'll talk to you soon.